After more than a year of campaigning, election 2018 is only 2 months away. What's the status of key races for governor, Congress, and the Iowa legislature? We assemble a team of Iowa political reporters for insight on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, August 31 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
The race for governor of Iowa began in earnest nearly 500 days ago when Kim Reynolds was sworn into office and political contenders began campaigning across the state. Now the home stretch of campaign 2018 is upon us. The Iowa governor's race, U.S. House seats under a national spotlight, and state legislative power all hanging in the balance 2 months from now. Gathering insight from the campaign trail, we've assembled a reporters' roundtable this week. Brianne Pfannenstiel is chief political reporter for the Des Moines Register. Joyce Russell covers politics for Iowa Public Radio. Erin Murphy is Des Moines bureau chief for Lee Enterprises. And Kay Henderson is news director for Radio Iowa. Well, I trust you've all had a nice, quiet, relaxed August, fresh, ready to start the campaign. Right. Let's start with the race for governor. Kay, I'd like to just go around the table and get everybody's input. What's your assessment of the campaign for governor?
Well, I work in radio, but this is a visual that occurs to me. You can't get away from what's happening with both of these parties. If you looked at one of those old black and white photos of two trains on the same track headed toward one another, that's kind of what the campaign feels like if you're covering it. Specifically to the Reynolds-Hubbell battle, the Reynolds folks are trying to paint Hubbell as unlikable. The Hubbell folks are trying to paint the governor as incompetent. We have the Yonkers versus the Medicare issues. They're both really trying to motivate their base with these arguments and turn off independent voters, in my opinion, which may decide this race.
Brianne, what's your your assessment of this race?
Well, one of the big new developments this week was Fred Hubbell releasing some of his tax return information. And to Kay's point, that's really, I think, something we're going to see the Reynolds folks hounding on more as they try to paint him as out of touch and elite. You know, he reported more than $3 million of income, which is not nothing. And so I think we're going to see them talking about that. We're also going to see them talking about his transparency. The Reynolds campaign released 10 years worth of her complete tax returns. Fred Hubbell released a 3-page summary from his state and federal returns. So I think we're going to see that play out possibly in some attack ads in the near future.
Joyce Russell, what do you see in this race?
Well, I think that Governor Reynolds is doing a good job playing the booster role. There are these rankings. Iowa's the best state in the country. Whereas Mr. Hubbell, you know, he's the challenger, and he's sort of put in the position or taken the position of there's really a lot wrong here that needs to be fixed. And I think that the governor is taking advantage of that very well. I think that if you observed Governor Reynolds at the fair, you could make the case just for sheer approachability that she has an edge over her challenger. She was there every day in her element, engaging people in conversation.
Erin, what's your take on?
I think Kay had it right that we have this element of Kim Reynolds talking about Fred Hubbell's as a rich, elite, out-of-touch Iowan while portraying herself as a common, everyday Iowan. And I agree with Brianne that we're going to hear a lot about the tax returns. I think what we'll hear more from the Hubble team in the coming weeks is on Medicaid, and they have a new ad out that's very powerful with stories of Iowans who rely on Medicaid services for themselves or their family members, and some of the trouble they've had since the state shifted to private management under former Governor Branstad and has been supported by Governor Reynolds. I think we're going to continue to hear Democrats hammer that story again as part of the bad management practices and really dredge up those personal, sometimes heartbreaking stories about people who are having trouble with this system right now.
I like Kay's metaphor. Go ahead.
But in addition to that, you have providers who are, haranguing that they haven't been paid for providing care to Medicaid patients. So it's not just patients who are telling their stories. It's business owners that run some sort of health clinic, or they're a doctor that's been unpaid, who are telling stories. And I think what's fascinating is the latest numbers that we've seen. There are 680,000 Iowans who are covered by Medicaid. When you consider that the state has a little bit over 3 million people, that's significant.
Speaking of numbers, Kay, we have a graphic showing voter registration figures. We don't have any poll data yet. I assume we'll be getting a lot after Labor Day. But here's a look at the active registered voters as of the 1st of August. And you can see that this is going to be a game of getting independent voters. Almost 700,000 no-party voters, Republicans in second with 643,000 and Democrats with 618,000. So it's a battle for the independent voter. What gives? Kay, I liked her image of the trains coming at each other. That was 1932 at the Iowa State Fair. Hoover versus Roosevelt. No, Lefty Mills covered it. But so what happens? I mean, how does this play out, Erin? I mean,
well, you talked about identifying those no-party voters. One of the things that political science talk about is the days of persuasion politics are more or less gone. What campaigns are trying to find, they're not trying to talk people into a vote one way or the other as much as they are trying to identify those no-party voters who basically vote one way or the other and just don't identify themselves as Democrats or Republicans. There's a significant percentage of no-party voters that usually vote Democratic or usually vote Republican. So for the campaigns, it's identifying those voters, and then, I hate to say it, it all comes down to turnout.
Brianne, there's supposed to be a blue wave coming. Right? Democrats are supposed to do well in this election year, and history says that they will. The party in power always loses seats. Trump's poll numbers are not that great. So do we give an edge in this to Fred Hubble?
I think Democrats like to think that there's going to be a blue wave, and they'll point to all kinds of indicators that says that it is. They'll point to enthusiasm. They'll point to voter registration, things like that. But I don't think anyone's taking that for granted here in Iowa. I think people recognize that this race is going to be close regardless. So I don't think anyone's really ready to give Fred Hubble a big edge in a blue wave.
I think that some Republicans are mocking the whole very idea of a blue wave. Their chairman, Jeff Kaufman, used the image. He said, "I think a mosquito could ride this blue wave just fine."
Well, he's paid to have that view. But nevertheless, it does seem like an uphill contest, Joyce, for the Democrats, because Iowa looks like it's becoming a more Republican state. The state is white, rural, older. Most people haven't gone to college. That's a profile of a modern-day Republican Trump voter. You saw the figures. They're ahead in voter registrations.
Well, I think they're pinning some hopes on, for example, suburban Republicans, suburban Republican women, both for the governor's race and for the down ballot races as well.
We've had a new issue injected into the race, not a new one, but immigration. The murder of Molly Tibbetts and the arrest of an undocumented worker in charge with her murder has raised the visibility of what was already a big issue. Kay, what's the political effect of this?
Well, I think it's fascinating in that when Terry Branstad was running in, I believe it was 1994, there was a high-profile murder in about the same area, and he immediately began calling for the death penalty. Governor Reynolds has not. started calling for the death penalty and, in fact, was very reticent about it. She issued a statement on the afternoon that the arrest of this person was announced and raised the immigration issue right out of the box and said Iowans are angry. Since then, she's been a little reluctant to talk about it as sheer politics. She's countering that I'm talking about policy, immigration policy, not the politics. And I think one reason is because of the reaction of the family.
Right, they don't want to see it politicized. But Brianne, it was immigration, nevertheless, was a political issue. Does this have the effect of firing up that Republican base or the Steve King voters who are opposed to illegal immigration?
Absolutely. The afternoon that this happened, follow any of the national media outlets, any of the right-wing talk shows, conservative radio, things like that. This was everywhere that day and in the days that followed. So Republicans, not just in Iowa, but nationally, are using this as a talking point to talk about immigration, to say we need to boost some things like strengthening our borders, mandating E-Verify to make sure that employers are checking the immigration status of their workers. Senators Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst said that, that program should be mandatory, but also maybe we should be looking at things like biometrics. So not just using a social security number to check that people are legal, but to make sure that they have a thumbprint, that their eye scan is, confirming that they are who they say they are.
Erin, doesn't this issue put rural Republicans in a bit of a bind? There's a lot of antipathy toward illegal immigrants or those who are here without papers, and yet at the same time, who's running the dairies? Who's doing the landscaping? And you look at the number of immigrants around Iowa and where they work, they're working in a lot of rural areas. Those rural economies, in fact, are dependent on those very people, right?
Yeah, and this individual charged in this case was working on a farm. So you're exactly right. And that's why a lot of those ag industry leaders have been calling for immigration reform for a number of years, long before this ever happened, because that's where they are getting a lot of their labor force right now. We asked the ag secretary candidates last week on this show whether there's essentially a shadow economy in the state right now with workers like this. It's absolutely an issue that they are concerned about, and they want to see the laws changed, but not in a way that would mass deport all these people, because that would empty out their workforce.
Joyce, another issue in this campaign of trade and tariffs. The president is playing hardball and threatening tariffs. What's the political fallout of that?
Well, farmers are being hurt by that. Corn and soybean farmers, livestock farmers are being hurt by that. But I've been to several roundtable discussions where you get farmers around a table. Most recently this week, farm industry people around a table talking to the U.S. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. And while there's anxiety about how long these depressed prices could last until these trade disputes are resolved, you're hearing very little criticism of President Trump in the meantime. He hasn't lost, from what I can see, he hasn't lost any of his faithfulness from Iowa Republicans, farmers or otherwise. And I think it's a question of how much longer it lasts. Well, if you get to the fall when it's time for farmers to go back to their banker to get their loans renewed for the inputs for the next year's crop, you might see a softening of that support when it gets to that time.
But if you look at the farm crisis, David, in this state, 1980, who won the state? Ronald Reagan. 1984, who won the state? Ronald Reagan. It wasn't until 1988 that Michael Dukakis won this state, partly because the angst got to such a level that the farm community said, we can't stand this anymore. How long did that take? And the pendulum swings a lot faster now politically than it did in the 1980s. But I think people are, naive to think that farm country is going to swing really fast on this against President Trump when they supported him wholeheartedly. In fact, if you look at the ethanol issue, the ethanol industry is pushing the EPA to allow year-round sale of a higher grade of ethanol. And what you hear from folks in the ethanol industry, Trump supporters, is that Trump is being ill-served by his folks in the EPA. Not that President Trump is wrong. He just has people around him are wrong. And I think that's really instructive for how the farm community is viewing the president.
And there are farmers who are absolutely grateful to the president for taking on this. They've said China has been a bad actor in negotiations for a number of years, and this needed to be addressed. They're willing to suffer through some short-term pain in the hopes that long-term this will be beneficial for them. So I think that speaks to what Kay was talking about, that this probably takes a little bit longer before it's something where farmers go south on the president, because they're willing to give this time to see what they see as a fix to a problem that's needed fixing. Where they're a little bit more uneasy, we were talking about China, where they're a little bit more uneasy about is NAFTA, the agreements with Canada and Mexico. There weren't a whole lot of calls for a massive overhaul of that system, and when you throw those countries in the mix, the unease ramps up a little bit.
I want to turn, to be continued as this goes on, I want to turn to the races for Congress. We have 4 congressional districts. Who wants to talk about the 1st district, what's happening there? We have some numbers for that district. Rod Blum is the incumbent. You see that registrations heavily favor the Democrats, and he's a Republican. Erin?
Yeah, he's won a couple elections in that Democratic-leaning district, sort of defied the odds, almost a 23,000 voter registration advantage there. But this is shaping up to be a tough re-election fight for Rod Blum. You talk about the national mood and how that's having an impact on congressional races, and the 1st district in Iowa, over there in eastern Iowa, seems to be one where things are really swinging back in Democrats' direction. There was a report in Politico this morning where Republicans are talking about some of the races they may have to withdraw from and leadership PACs to spend their money more wisely in other places, and they listed the 1st district in Iowa as one of those places that it may not be worth their resources because they're seeing things moving so far in the Democrats' direction.
Yeah, that's one of the, as you mentioned, that's one of 2, and half the congressional districts in this state are toss-up races. Well, let's turn to the 2nd district, Joyce. The numbers there, have that graphic. You can see in the 2nd district, Democrats hold a registration edge there.
And the incumbent Dave Loebsack probably doesn't have too much to worry about with his Republican opponent Christopher Peters. He's a physician, practices medicine in Iowa City. This is his 2nd attempt at unseating Dave Loebsack. He did very well 2 years ago, but he, of course, was helped by the strong Republican wave. So he's a Republican, but he's kind of a libertarian at heart, and I don't think the libertarian candidate in that race, Mark Strauss, maybe won't mind me saying that.
In the 3rd district, Iowa's other toss-up race, Brianne, Democrats and Republicans have virtually tied in voter registrations there. Maybe we could take a look at that. Look at how even that Republican and Democratic, and no parties shortly behind. I mean, you look at those numbers, there's no reason. There's every reason to think that is a toss-up race. What's your take?
This is a congressional district where it regularly appears to be a toss-up because of these voter registration numbers. And again, to Erin's point, Politico was reporting this morning that national Republican groups were kind of triaging where they're going to focus their efforts. And they said this is another race where they may have to pull back a little bit if Congressman Young is not pulling his own weight, was the phrase that they used in terms of fundraising. So if you look over the past couple of weeks, he was here at the state fair with House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy. He was doing a fundraiser with Vice President Mike Pence. This week he was touring the state with Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue. So he's really trying to get out there. He's got people coming in on his behalf to really ramp up those fundraising numbers. So I think that's what we'll be seeing a lot from him in the next couple of weeks.
You know, parties will deny they write off any races. But the fact is they do, and they have to triage, and we'll know whether this is true in the 1st district and the 3rd district by watching the television commercials, and whether all of a sudden there are fewer independent ads there. So stay tuned on that question. Kay, last district, 4th district.
Congressman Steve King seeking another term. challenged by a Democrat named J.D. Scholten, very well known in the Sioux City area, which is a population center in the district. He's a former professional baseball player. And I think the important thing about this race is that Scholten energizes the Democratic base in an area of the state where they can get real depressed because they are definitely the minority. And so Democrats need to run up the score as much as they can in places where they know Republicans will still win. And I think that's what a lot of this particular campaign is about. It is trying to motivate Democrats to come out for a Hubbell or some of the other statewide elected officials who can really benefit from turnout statewide.
Erin, everybody's watching what's going to happen with millennial voters. People are basically under age 35. What's your take on that?
It's going to be an interesting year to watch. You know, typically the young voters, the youngest voters, are among the worst to turn out percentage-wise. That's historically the data shows that. There are some efforts this year, and particularly by progressive groups, to motivate and turn out those young voters a little more. There's some issues maybe that fall a little more in young voters' wheelhouse. Student debt, college debt is a rising issue. Gun control is a rising issue with all the school shootings. Next Gen Iowa, or Next Gen America, I'm sorry, Tom Steyer's group has been very active in Iowa on all the campuses, registering students first, and then they'll be following up with them, trying to motivate them to vote. So historically, it's not been a block that has turned out enough to influence elections. It will be interesting to see if this year's different.
Does anybody else see millennial voters as being something that a segment of the electorate that comes roaring in and maybe helps Democrats, Brianne?
Well, I can't speak for all of my people as a fellow millennial.
No, you're not.
But I think you know, Democrats in particular are energized across the country, and I think young people, you know, a lot of young people who were perhaps unable to vote in the last election, seeing the results of what's happened, you know, I think there's anecdotal evidence at least that they could be a strong voting bloc.
I think what's stronger in Iowa is organizing around issues. I think a relevant issue for many people is the abortion issue for both bases. It really motivates Republican voters that Governor Kim Reynolds signed the fetal heartbeat bill. It really motivates Democratic voters that abortion policy is, you know, sort of on the ropes, if you will. I think issues are really motivating voters, which, you know, is kind of counterintuitive. We think, you know, they look at a candidate and do they like them?
All right. We got just a couple minutes left, Erin. The battle for the legislature. You had a piece last week about that. What's happening in the fight for the legislature?
Yeah, Democrats feel they have a chance to flip control of the Iowa House. They would have to change control of 10 seats in order to do that. To Joyce's point earlier, suburban voters is one of the places where they're hopeful in some of the bigger metro suburban areas. And also some districts in eastern Iowa, those Obama-Trump districts, they're hoping that some of those voters are coming back to them in this election and will help them flip some seats there too. So they feel they have a chance.
What about in the state Senate?
Senate map is a lot harder for Democrats. It's pretty unlikely we'll see it. In fact, it's ironic. We could see House switch control to Democrats, and Senate Republicans could actually grow their advantage. That's just the way the map is set up this year.
One of the things that the Senate is focusing on, the Senate Republicans, is trying to get more women among their ranks. They're in their 29 Republican caucus. For most of this time, they've had one woman. A special election gave them a second woman, but that's a very large caucus with only a couple of women in it. And so there are 5 Republican women who are challenging Democratic incumbents, are going after open seats, and they're hoping to boost the number of women. In addition, I agree, I think they could very easily even improve their edge in the Senate.
Okay, we have just a minute left. The Democratic National Committee set a date for the caucuses. Will it hold?
That's the big question. We always look to New Hampshire and how New Hampshire reacts, because this will be a big change. The Democratic National Committee has directed Iowa to give a broad sweep of participants the ability to cast absentee. votes in the Iowa caucuses. The people who put on these say, thank goodness, because we were having a hard time finding places that were big enough for everybody that wanted to participate, number one. Number two, February 3rd is the date that's set. We don't yet know if that's February 3rd. I think we'll know by October 2017 how things shake out. That's when Iowa in 2007 had to change the date to January 3rd. So mark both of those dates on your calendar, please.
Brianne, who are some of the, a lot of candidates think the game is still on. Just a few seconds left. Who do you see?
In the state right now, we're seeing John Delaney everywhere. He's completed his first 99 county tour of the state. We've also seen Eric Swalwell here a lot. He's a congressman from California. We've seen some others as well coming through. Andrew Yang here is here this weekend. Senator Jeff Merkley is also in town. So
and we got and Delaney has already done the full Grassley.
He's done it
99 counties. That's a first. Well, we're out of time. Thanks to all of you. Good luck on the trail. And thank you for joining us. We'll be back with another edition of Iowa Press after Labor Day next week. You can catch Iowa Press at our regular air time, 7:30 Friday night and noon on Sunday on IPTV's main channel, with a rebroadcast Saturday morning on our .3 World channel. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.